Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. My name is Bobby Yazdi. I lead our customer success and account management teams here at Hadrius. Today, we'll be talking about why SMS-based compliance is actually posing a risk and a liability for firms. Today, I am joined by Silver Regulatory Associates, Nick and Michael, who specialize and offer in SEC, FINRA, and cybersecurity compliance services. Of course, Cheyenne from FirmScribe, chairman of FirmScribe, who offers direct operating system message capturing. And of course, if you don't know who Hadrius is, just in the off chance, we offer an AI native SEC and FINRA compliant infrastructure and platform. As I mentioned today, we'll be talking about some key topics of why, again, SMS-based compliance is actually posing a risk for firms. We'll talk about some of the hacks that have happened that is causing some firms to change their compliance strategy. Just to quickly level set and paint the picture for our audience today, my first question to our panelists is, what exactly happened with the telco hacks? We'd love to hear more about that, and why is it still an open issue more than a year later?
Sure. So I'm happy to start. And I don't know if there's some deck content to go along with this. But, to set the stage, right, even before all the fines started a couple of years ago for off-channel communications, the primary method for capturing mobile communications from people was SMS capture in one of two forms, which is either you had a corporate device, you turned off iMessage, and it just became SMS only, and that was captured at the carrier and delivered to your archive. Or the firm deployed an app on your phone that allowed you to text, and sometimes you could also call through it, sometimes not. And that became the default capture method for the bulk of firms. And even as the fines kind of came in and there was a large adoption, that still became the primary capture mechanism. Now, a lot of people in the industry talk about the telemessage hack as being the kind of largest hack in the industry. That's actually, from our perspective, not the case. We think the biggest one is really what's called Salt Typhoon, which in December 2024, the FBI and CISA, which is the federal InfoSec agency of the US government, came out and said, everyone needs to stop using SMS because Chinese state-funded hacking operations had penetrated all the US and European telcos. And it wasn't like a quick, they got in for an hour kind of thing. They have ongoing access that there were Senate hearings a month or two ago kind of saying, why can't we get this out of there? And so this has created like an open InfoSec gap, which is that all this SMS traffic that's moving across from these devices that's moving across the networks, it is now moving unencrypted, moving down a channel where there's potentially access.
Super insightful. Thank you. That's very interesting. And the background is really helpful. Thank you, Cheyenne. I would love to also learn more about what are regulators actually asking about in exams right now? And particularly, how is Reg SB tying in cyber and off-channel communications together in their exams?
Sure. So just to offer up a little bit more background from a regulatory perspective, cybersecurity has been a focus area for the SEC for years now. It was more than 10 years ago that the SEC put out guidance for registrants instructing them to follow the NIST, the NIST cybersecurity framework. And in spite of the fact that last year, a proposed rule on cybersecurity was withdrawn, among others, by the SEC, cybersecurity is explicitly included in the SEC's 2026 exam priorities. And as Cheyenne already mentioned, off-channel communications has continuously been a focus area for the SEC as well. So what we're seeing at this moment is a merging of these two topics, cybersecurity and electronic communications, particularly because we're now very much focused on compliance with the amendments of Regulation SP. These are requirements to tighten our controls around the treatment of personally identifiable information, PII. And so for this reason, security of messaging is top of mind and is at the forefront. During a regulatory exam, we will always get, or almost always get, a request for how is the registrant retaining, monitoring, and reviewing electronic communications. But now that the SEC has signaled that they're going to be laser focused on Regulation SP, we are expecting many more requests in this area. So I'll turn it over to Mike to go through that.
Yeah, perfect. And just kind of piggyback on what Nick said there. Obviously, with the Reg SP amendments going into effect already for larger firms back in December of last year, and then now for smaller firms, just over a month in June of this year. Kind of the SEC is looking at that focus on a written information security program, especially things around, incident response policies and procedures. Especially everything that's tied into customer breach notifications. So if there was a reasonable likelihood of a breach that occurred, notifying those customers within 30 days, and then having a vendor breach notification policy too, including in vendor SLAs now moving forward with the 72-hour breach notification from them. So these things are all kind of tying into the compliance aspect, especially around SMS-based communications and archiving. We've already seen it in a couple of our clients' exams already this year, being asked in those questions. So, ensuring that your firm has a strong, information security policy and program, that it's actionable, and then, that it's tested, doing things like a tabletop exercise, for example, is going to be more scrutinized heavily kind of moving forward here in the next part of 2026 and beyond.
Yeah. I'll just add a sort of final take on my end here. We've got at this point about, almost 1,000 customers. And so, boots on the ground, we're seeing that this stuff is actually real, right? And it's also being asked for in exams and being requested of from vendors, from partners, so on and so forth. Where we're seeing the Reg SP, effectively connect the dots is, between the cybersecurity and off-channel comms is pretty much it's the same core idea, right? The protection of customer information depends on where the business is connected and what's being monitored. That hasn't changed. The methodology of how to do it is now just increased rather than kind of being changed. What we're seeing is, firms, even smaller ones on the, 10 to 25 person or even smaller firms than that are having to show a risk-based program to protect that customer information. We're seeing controls around access, transmission, retention, incident response. You need to see it in the contracts you're signing with the vendors too. For example, we've got a Reg SP clause, as I'm sure other folks here do too. Really, like the way I think about it is capture, monitor, surveil, and audit are going to be the 4 parts of the framework we think about when you apply the regulatory lens towards this stuff, as well as just the technology perspective. And I'll dig into that more in a later slide.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that as well. So I'm just identifying as well, what communication channels that your firm might be using, because there is a blind spot there that we've seen previously, from firms just not understanding what communication channels are being utilized by their employees. So ensuring those are also laid out in those, policies, and they're being attested to, at least on an annual basis as well.
Super helpful. And for folks in the audience, indirect tone here has been just make sure you stay and remain diligent. So thank you, folks, for sharing. Out of curiosity, doesn't RCS solve for this? Maybe it will be helpful to hear more about what RCS actually is for the audience. And also, from your perspective here, who has already moved off of SMS, and why did they make the switch, and why now?
So I'll talk a little bit about RCS for a minute. If you're unfamiliar with it, if you have an iPhone, which I think is the majority used product, right? There's always this blue bubble, green bubble thing, right? And the green bubble is I'm not messaging with an iPhone. And historically, that's been SMS, which is what's exposed here. Now, if you're talking to a recent device, like a top-of-the-line Android device or to some other device in the ecosystem, that green bubble might go over a new communication channel called RCS. And that is pretty much all in place now to be end-to-end encrypted. And for the cases that aren't, will be shortly, with some very important caveats. And the the two issues here are this. One, the phone companies can't capture the RCS. So if you're giving everybody company devices and you're turning off iMessage, you are also turning off RCS to get the capture, and it's all unencrypted. If you're using one of these apps to message with people, like you have a special phone number, that stuff is mostly SMS. And while it is moving to RCS, the way that that specification is defined is different from an app than from a phone. When it's a phone, it's end-to-end encrypted. But when it's an app, it's visible as it moves across the telco, which the telco requires because the app API stuff is where they worry about getting a lot of spam. So if you have one of those apps, even if they eventually upgrade it to RCS, it's still visible. So you still kind of have this same problem where if you move to RCS, you're now in a place that the phone company is not in the business of capturing, which makes sense because the phone company is really in the business of selling phones. And they just do carrier capture as a way to be able to sell phones, not because they're in the core business of looking at how do we secure communications and build this end-to-end capture solution. That's a totally different skill set. I think, and so real quick, just kind of following through this slide here and touching on your other questions. If you have corporate phones, you've turned off iMessage, okay, you have the problem. And if you're using one of these apps with a third-party phone number in it, whether or not it lets you talk as well through it, you have the same problem. And this problem is an InfoSec gap, right? Like it's a problem. And I'm going to give an example or two of how this could be taken advantage of. But it's just a thing that needs to be closed. It's not an attempt to sort of scare people. But the reasons that people will come in and look at this in an audit and be concerned about it is that this gap allows, here's an example. You could take all the SMS traffic that's running through the telcos, run it through AI, and figure who is people messaging with their wealth managers. And because SMS is not just not encrypted, but it's not signed, which means that it can be spoofed. And I can send an SMS and make it look like it came from Som. A nation state actor could one morning, Tuesday at 10 a.m., just send messages to wealth managers that seem like they came from all their clients that say, sell all my Tesla. And that's the kind of stuff, do I think that's going to happen on Tuesday? No. But that's the kind of thing that is what, to give you a sense of why there's a risk here. And then as far as customers moving, we are seeing customers moving. The most aggressive and shocking moves that we're seeing is actually in government agencies and not just the Secret Service, right? State agencies that work on things like equal employment of opportunity at a state level are coming in and saying, we have to move entirely from SMS to some encrypted channels. So some of them are talking about moving state level non-international traffic all to WhatsApp just for encryption. And I think like this is a sign that the risk is viewed as pervasive and not going away, and that CISA directive that everybody needs to move off of SMS is being taken seriously inside of the government as well.
Cheyenne might
That's
be
what I have.
one of the best people in the world to be given that feedback and that advice. So obviously bears listening to. So I think I ended off the last part of the conversation talking about kind of exam teams and what they probe into. Really, like I mentioned, the four pieces that I think about here again are the capture, the monitor, the surveil, the audit. Capture, I think, is really straightforward. Surveil is also pretty straightforward. It's when the data is inside, your walls, what's happening with it, right? Like this is where you've got your lexicon, you've got your natural language based, AI rules, what have you. But really, it's those two other pieces that I think are really relevant to this conversation. It's part two, the monitor, and part four, the audit. You want to monitor to make sure when that data is coming in, what kind of channels is it coming in through? What are the sort of cybersecurity, Reg SP repercussions here? Which channels are carrying that customer information, right? It's not just iMessage, it's not just SMS, but it's also, things like Signal, telemessage, so on and so forth. Finally, what's approved, what's prohibited, And then how do you actually detect those exceptions? And then fourth is that audit piece, which is, okay, well, I've done the capture, I've done the monitoring, I've done the surveillance. Prove it, right? Timestamp it, timestamp who's seen it, who hasn't seen it. Cheyenne, when you mentioned the part of your conversation about these messages not being signed, I was thinking about that show, The Wire, right? Like if anyone's seen that, the risk of, what happens when, nation state actors or even just anyone that's not the sender or the receiver is looking at intercepting or even just reading these messages. So I'll pause there in case anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen now how for those in the audience who are regulated entities, registrants, how this can impact their business. In the context of Regulation SP, the biggest risk here is, access to personally identifiable information that our customers, our investors in our funds, our clients in our separately managed accounts, our customers for broker dealers. And I think that most registrants at this stage are feeling relatively confident about the retention of these communications. But as they're going through this Regulation SP initiative, they're realizing that security of these communications really needs to be taken even more seriously and go beyond just training your staff, really making that assessment of what is passing through these channels and how should we prioritize our encryption.
Thank you, everyone. Very insightful. I mean, the added layer here is obviously cybersecurity and the susceptibility of hacking and bad actors swooping in not only to see data, but also giving false orders, which is definitely risks. And when we originally planned for this webinar, Mythos from the new AI model from Anthropic wasn't in the news just yet, but that is just an added layer that complicates and puts firms at risk. So thank you all for sharing. My next question for you all is, where are the risks and where do you see CCOs get this wrong?
I think I'll start this one. I would rephrase the question rather than where CCOs get this wrong, what CCOs are struggling with the most in the context of security. And I think that would really be a very common theme to any conversation a compliance officer has with others, particularly internal stakeholders. We're very often in a position where we need to convince our peers that the controls we are advocating for are important. And so I think the biggest challenge here is making that case. And our recommendation would be to go straight to Regulation SP. Don't necessarily talk about this as a luxury or a best practice. This is the regulation, and we have to do it. And we're going to be asked about this during our next exam. And very often when you bring up the exam, that's when you get your peers' attention a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Look, if sensitive info is being discussed over these unapproved channels, that's going to be seen as a direct weakness. It's creating blind spot, right? For monitoring, retention, surveillance, all the stuff we already talked about. I've seen that most CCOs have been solving in the questions they're asking and what they're buying, right? They're solving for record keeping. Can we capture, retain, produce, so on and so forth. What we're seeing now, especially with your larger firms, your enterprises, is questions around, are you protecting customer information in transit and at rest? Can you show your safeguards program? Is that working? We're actually seeing a lot of this, the first question, at least, in a ton of RFPs, vendor due diligence questionnaires. The big enterprises have already been thinking about this for years, but I think what we're seeing is everyone needs to. What you need to think about is you can capture a message that contained PII after it already traversed a channel, right? With the wrong security posture Cheyenne was talking about earlier. Personal devices, vendors you can't really govern. And at that point, you've preserved the record, but there's still exposure that hasn't been solved for with the right safeguards.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you both, Nick and Sam. When we're talking about this security risk, it seems to be boiled down to, and the operating system direct capture being just secure by design. I would just love to learn more, and I'm not as technical as I want to be, but would love to hear more about why can't just telecommunications companies just do this? What does this platform level capture actually mean? And how should a firm evaluate the encrypted capture vendors?
I can speak a little bit to that. So, uh, so the simplest answer to why telcos can't be in the middle, you might think of it as like going to any website where you buy something and putting in your credit card, right? The idea is you can see your credit card, the person at the other end can see your credit card, and nobody standing in the middle can see your credit card. And this is becoming the basis of all these communications, right? And so the SMS predates all of this. And so SMS is just the person in the middle can see all of it, right? And there's, really no way to get like a SOC 2 report from the telco, right? Like nobody goes to Verizon and AT&T and picks between them based on their InfoSec diligence. They don't even give you that stuff, right? And but the core issue is there, right? And then in order to then go and do the capture, you have to how you do it varies by platform, right? And so you obviously want to look for like, do they have a robust InfoSec team? Have they been doing this a long time? And then if you can, you want to walk through how does the platform capture work? Because basically, if you think of it, not similar to the credit card, but when you send somebody an iMessage, maybe you're in a group chat, right? And there's 4 or 5 endpoints. It's encrypted at every place in the middle, but at those endpoints, it's visible at 4 or 5 different places, right? And so essentially what encrypted capture does is it intercedes at an endpoint, either by creating a new one somewhere that everything is getting copied to, or on the device at one place or another, it's doing the capture right there. So for example, our Signal product, our Signal product that's coming soon and our Android product do that right on the device. Our iMessage product, we create an endpoint and we basically set up racks and racks of Mac minis, 220 minis in a rack and just rows of them. And then we authenticate the users to those places. And then we have a full robust InfoSec practice that manages all of that capture and moving it. And we do little things like we never centralize the data when it gets there, right? So for us to experience like a telemessage style hack, you're talking about thousands and thousands of individual machines that would have to be hacked because it's not going through like one grand central station sort of relay point, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's in there, but it really starts at like, how are you doing the endpoint capture? And then what's your security posture from that perspective? Is that helpful?
That is very helpful.
Cheyenne, I'll put you maybe on the spot here with a question. When we started Hadrius and we wanted to sort of figure out how to do this sort of capture, we sprinted to a partnership, with you all, and then just the sort of platform level firms out there. It seems obvious that the platform level native capture is the safest, also most direct way to do things. Why do you think firms, status quo converge towards telco level capture?
I think it's two reasons. But the primary one is cost. Like the reality of the buying in this space is that the people who are making the decisions are oftentimes walking into other rooms and presenting options. And the people picking don't see any difference because they're just like, look, we just have to buy it for compliance. It doesn't really matter, right? And having unencrypted data travel through the telco and have them give you a data dump of that once a week is much cheaper than standing up racks and racks of Mac minis. It's not inordinately priced. We do all of that ourselves. And we got into this really to solve a lot of social problems around kids and mobile devices. That's another vertical that we serve. And to do that, we had to drive costs down to zero. But a 20% or 30% increase in cost, sometimes when you just take it to the people in the other room, they're just picking because they don't understand the difference. They just look at it and go buy the cheap one, like get back to the thing. And so I think that that's actually the primary reason of convergence. I think the secondary reason of convergence is that that salespeople sell what they have to sell, right? And this has been a legacy thing that large providers have had to sell for many years. And so they have the relationship and they say, oh, when people come in with that problem, we sell them this. And I think that is, you're starting to see some movement there. But I think those two things, sort of inertia and that kind of pricing thing, is what slowed the adoption. Although, again, we're seeing that start to change.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Just putting my startup founder hat on. Most businesses don't start, and most products don't get built unless there's like a why now moment, right? There's a reason that you know this maybe hasn't been prioritized for business owners or product builders in the last 10, 15, 20 years. One reason, like you mentioned, is obviously salespeople have, sell what they have to sell. And builders build stuff that solves a problem that people are thinking about and actually, care about maybe spending that extra 10, 15, 20%. I think it's pretty obvious that in the past, what would you say, 1, 2 years, this telemessage stuff, the Salt Typhoon stuff is now much more in the public sphere than it maybe used to. Obviously, you've got your cybersecurity folks that have been thinking about this stuff for decades, if not more. But now, so is everybody else.
Yeah, and I think also the richness of data with AI, like people are coming to appreciate little things. Like we can actually give you the phone contacts that you can't get, right? We can actually, some of these telcos, you get the data once a day, right? And being able to deliver real time, near real time, you see it in what you do, right? Like if you, the richer the data you have, and the better like AI you have, the more leverage there is in it for the customer, right? So I think that in our business, inside of, this is a massive accelerant inside of regulated industries. There's this other massive accelerant, which is AI, which is just like, if for people who haven't been capturing, we can get 10 years of history off of an iPhone and move it somewhere. So you want to train on 30,000 employees that you had. Like there's this other element that's coming in that plays both here and more broadly that is sort of like, oh, wow, with richer data. And we just have richer, faster data, and that ultimately will win.
Very helpful. Thank you, folks. Very, very insightful. We have talked about the risks and what other firms may be doing, but for folks in the audience, would love to learn more about next steps. If a firm is right now on SMS capture today, where do they start Monday morning? And what would good look like to a regulator in that setup?
Sure, I'll start with that, Bobby. First and foremost, we would recommend looking at this issue holistically and in the context of the broader Regulation SP initiative. Because for a registrant at this stage, they've already started some sort of assessment, and they should leverage the framework that they apply to other areas of their business to communications channels. I would also say and recommend that, don't hesitate to utilize the resources internally and externally, whether that's your CTO or your internal IT resource or somebody on the outside, a cybersecurity consultant. Get their feedback before flipping the switch, because all of this will help you come to a more sustainable solution for your business. And then, of course, from a regulatory perspective, we're always thinking about training. Have that assessment, have this InfoSec gap once it's filled or while it's getting filled, have that informed messaging to your team so that they understand and they're sensitized to the risks involved. I think a regulator, if you were to walk them through those steps, you would definitely get a few points there. And at this stage, putting points aside, the regulator will expect that this discussion has been conducted.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on that too, just in terms of defensibility, as you see on the slide here, the last one, just ensuring you have something that is, from an operational perspective, is defensible in your policies and your procedures, and is actionable. It's nice to just, kind of check a box and move on to the next thing, but actually being able to provide proof that you are conducting these things and you're doing these things. And then from a compliance perspective, letting them understand that you are taking it seriously. Like I said, it's come up in a bunch of exams we've seen already this year, so it will be a higher focus moving forward.
And I know I speak for all of the members of the audience who are regulated entities, CCOs, compliance officers. Exams are scary, but they can be a little bit less scary if you start the conversation or have a robust conversation on security now, because that conversation will be reflected in your conversations with regulators when they're examining your business.
Diane, Sam, would love to also hear from you guys here.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I've been thinking about, so your question was, what does good look like? So I think Nick answered um, what do they do? Maybe not even Monday morning, right? It's Thursday today, Friday morning, Thursday afternoon. Why wait? Um, I think it's pretty easy. It's easy but not simple, or maybe it's simple but not easy, right? What does good look like? Just know what's going on, right? But with petabytes of data, that's really, really hard to. That's it's easy to say, hard to get executed in practice. Um, we've bet our company on the sort of notion that AI is one of those ways you do that. Obviously, it's not a silver bullet, pun not intended. But it's one of the tools you need to make sure you have in your toolkit, right? Like Cheyenne mentioned, we've got more data than we know what to do with. Now, the job to do is make sense of it. So obviously, I could talk about AI rules for hours and hours, but whatever tools you have in your toolkit, talk to your IT team, talk to your CTO, so on and so forth, and ask the question of, look, I've got all this really, really rich data. I've got potentially, bad actors in there, or I've got potentially issues that I want to solve. How do I solve those? And I'll pass to Cheyenne to add anything else there.
Well, I feel like the joke answer is that what does good look like for encrypted messaging capture? It looks like FirmScribe. But look, I think there are other people in the market. I think the real question that you want to be looking at is, where are your customers? How do you need to meet them? Right? Hopefully we have a product that does that, but whether we do or not, you need to be using a product that does that and protects the integrity of their data, right? In our roles, in your role as a CCO, and in our roles as members of the kind of financial global ecosystem of communication, right? We want to make sure that all this stuff is safe and secure so that we're protecting the integrity of the markets. And I think that's what good looks like. And then it's a case by case thing for each business and for each team, and who you're talking to and what markets those are in and what the people you're talking to are using. But just making sure that it's encrypted and signed, whatever it is.
Awesome. Very helpful. Thank you guys for outlining the next steps anyone in the audience can follow. And I'm seeing some Q&A trickle in. Folks in the audience, please feel free to continue sending them. But one of the first ones that comes up here is actually about the Mythos and Anthropic's new cybersecurity AI that is finding vulnerability in 27-year pieces of software. The question in the audience is if anyone can walk through the AI attack scenario that was mentioned earlier and how it relates to what we're talking about today.
Do you mean the AI attack scenario that I talked about with sort of my example of capture? So I think that what I was talking about was actually kind of one relatively simple, here's something that could be done today if somebody had access to this large stream of data to slice and dice it and use it in a particular way. I think the Mythos thing is interesting, and everybody may not agree with me on this, but having read a lot of articles, it seems like actually a lot of AIs are able to find identical and similar vulnerabilities to what Anthropic's found. And so it's unclear where the balance is between really great marketing for AI and this one particular model being better. In general, I think that whether it's Mythos or any of these other things that's available, I think you're going to see more defensive and more offensive cybersecurity attacks and and defensive things done. So it's going to improve the security, and it's going to find more gaps more quickly. And I think what that means is for people here is just moving as quickly as possible to the most secure things that you can, and then making sure that you have an infosec posture that's continuing to kind of evaluate those things with penetration tests and ongoing agentic AI tests on your own systems, the systems that are being leveraged to handle your data. And then on the other side, like keeping abreast of what the movements are. But the big things here are the lowest hanging fruit is going to be the stuff that is easiest to access. And that's why it's such an obvious gap.
Yeah, and we're having a lot of conversations currently with a lot of our clients. Obviously, AI adoption is becoming it's happened very fast over the last couple of years. And it seems like every provider out there is trying to beat the next one in terms of scalability, and quickness to market. But the main conversation we have, and this kind of ties back into the Reg SP picture and data protection, just do your due diligence on those vendors, understand where that data is going to be lying, understand, let your employees know, especially from a training perspective, what data they should be entering and not entering into these types of platforms to prevent any sort of data leakage, preventing any PII or MPI from being entered into the system if it's not needed. So it all kind of folds into that larger picture of data protection and Reg SP, kind of guidelines. So just understanding and having that knowledge base of, hey, just because it's easy to use and it might get you an answer quicker, there's no guarantee that, that data that you're entering is going to necessarily be protected in there as well.
Very helpful. Thank you very much. Monitoring the Q&A here, one other question is, what happens if a firm waits 12 months?
I mean,
Well,
I'll add. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say, if they were just examined, that might not be uncovered during the next regulatory exam. But if like most registrants, you have not been examined in the last 12 months, you may very well get examined within the next 12 months. So from that perspective, this conversation that we're trying to prepare for will actually occur. And if you don't have the right answers, that's going to become very clear to the examiner. I would also note that the conversations that the examiners are going to be having with registrants is not just CCO. It's also with other colleagues and stakeholders in the firm, including executives, investment professionals, marketing professionals. So very often, these are the types of things that come up in those interviews and those conversations. And so when they read your electronic communications policy and they see that IM, email, WhatsApp are the acceptable platforms, but then during an interview, reference to text messages comes up as part of your, investment idea or investment generation process. You're late for a meeting. You're sending some notes to the investment committee. That's going to come up. So it's something to get ahead of.
Very helpful. Thank you, Nick. Just out of curiosity, what recent surprises have you seen in exams that folks in the audience should know about? It's a question for everyone.
I would say the most recent surprises that have come up, and I'll turn it over to Mike because I know he's been managing this for a lot of our clients, really do have to stem from these conversations that examiners will have with other individuals in the firm, other than that CCO, where something's uncovered, a particular trade to look into. Well, show us that documentation for that trade. Where does that documentation lie? Actually, it was via SMS. The order to place that trade was via SMS. And then that continues down the road of how secure is that message. But Mike, I'll turn it over to you in terms of what you've seen recently.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then some of the other stuff we've seen as well is a lot of it's focusing now on incident response too. Making sure you have a laid out incident response plan, that the team internally who is responsible for that and has the oversight for that, has that been tested? Does everybody understand their roles? Does your IT provider understand this? Do you have communication procedures in place for not only your clients, but for, regulatory bodies? So having a full kind of incident response program on top of, everything else involved with the compliance world, is what we've seen a lot lately in these exam questionnaires.
And
One
I
of the
would
things
just
I've
add,
seen,
oh, sorry.
yeah, I'll just add, and we might be saying the same thing here, Nick. I've seen a lot more of an expectation of interconnectedness from regulators. Just
Yeah.
like Nick mentioned, can you show us proof of this, trade request sent over SMS, or can you show us proof that, a trade request sent over, Bloomberg actually got executed the right way, didn't get fingered, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Really, that's one of the other ones I've seen has been, can you show us the entire case or risk profile for your top, say, 10, maybe riskiest is the wrong word, but high, highest number of flag reps or employees, right? So across comms, across trades, across code of ethics, firm oversight, so on and so forth. What's your employees, what's your branches, what's their full risk profile, and that's from our customer conversations. That's that sort of direction of full visibility across comms as well as compliance signals has been where Hadrius and a lot of our partners and vendors have been moving towards.
I would just add that regulators, although they sometimes pay attention to compliance dates, don't be surprised if they apply that compliance date prematurely. If data security is top of mind, they're going to ask you the questions and hold you to that standard, even before a few weeks from now, the compliance date for Reg SP for smaller firms.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for such an insightful conversation talking about the risks, the next steps, and just setting the stage of why is this a concern that folks should think about now and plan to prepare for to mitigate. I know we have a few more minutes before our webinar officially ends, but we'll love to just ask if there's any parting thoughts or comments or recommendations any of you have for folks in the audience.
Yeah, I was just gonna say from our side, if you're sitting there and you're a CCO and you're wearing multiple hats internally, and you're scared about all this because maybe you don't fully understand the big picture, just identify internally, have those conversations. It's more important to find out what you don't know, than walk into an exam and being asked these questions and not understand them. So don't be too scared about them. They can be very easily, explained and sussed out for you. So that would be my recommendation.
Absolutely, Mike. It's a great point. And I would just reiterate, let's look at this holistically, team. Data security is, for regulated entities, a matter of regulation at SP at the moment. So leverage what you've already done as part of that initiative to inform next steps on this particular InfoSec gap that Cheyenne pointed out.
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing, right? Stop settling for good enough, right? There's better out there. We're all on the side of innovation.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone in the audience for taking the time out of their day to spend this time on our webinar. Hopefully you found it as insightful and engaging as I did. And I want to thank our panelists as well. Thank you so much for taking the time, and really appreciate you guys sharing your insights with us.
Our pleasure. We're looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. We'll make it happen. Thank you, folks.
Take care.